Comparison of Numa with Lycurgus by Plutarch, translated by Aubrey Stewart. Now that we have gone through the lives of Numa and Lycurgus, we must attempt, without being daunted by difficulties, to reconcile the points in which they appear to differ from each other. Much they appear to have had in common, as, for example, their self-control, their piety, and their political and educational ability. And while the peculiar glory of Numa is his acceptance of the throne, that of Lycurgus is his abdication. Numa received it without having asked for it. Lycurgus, when in full possession, gave it up. Numa, though a private man, and not even a Roman, was chosen by the Romans as their king, but Lycurgus, from being a king, reduced himself to a private station. It is honorable to obtain a crown by righteousness, but it is also honorable to prefer righteousness to a crown. Numa's virtue made him so celebrated that he was judged worthy to be king. Lycurgus's made him so great that he did not care to be king. Again, like those who tune the strings of a lyre, Lycurgus drew tighter the relaxed and licentious Sparta, while Numa merely slackened the highly strung and warlike Rome, so that here Lycurgus had the more difficult task. He had to persuade his countrymen not to take off their armor and lay aside their swords, but to leave off using gold and silver, and to lay aside costly hangings and furniture. He had not to make them exchange wars for sacrifice and gay festivals, but to cease from feasts and drinking parties, and work hard both in the field and in the palaestra to train themselves for war. For this reason, Numa was able to effect his purpose without difficulty, and without any loss of popularity and respect, while Lycurgus was struck and pelted, and in danger of his life, and even so could scarcely carry out his reforms. Yet the genius of Numa was kindly and gentle, and so softened and changed the reckless, fiery Romans that they became peaceful, law-abiding citizens. And if we must reckon Lycurgus's treatment of the Helots as part of his system, it cannot be denied that Numa was a far more civilized lawgiver, seeing that he allowed even to actual slaves some taste of liberty by his institution of feasting them together with their masters at the festival of Saturn. For this custom of allowing the laborers to share in the harvest feast is traced to Numa. Some say that this is in remembrance of the equality which existed in the time of Saturn, when there was neither master nor slave, but all were kinsmen and had equal rights. Both evidently encouraged the spirit of independence and self-control among their people, while of other virtues, Lycurgus loved bravery and Numa loved justice best. Unless indeed we should say that, from the very different temper and habits of the two states, they required to be treated in a different manner. It was not from cowardice, but because he scorned to do an injustice, that Numa did not make war, while Lycurgus made his countrymen warlike, not in order that they might do wrong, but that they might not be wronged. Each found that the existing system required very important alterations to check its excesses and supply its defects. Numa's reforms were all in favor of the people, whom he classified into a mixed and motley multitude of goldsmiths and musicians and cobblers, while the constitution introduced by Lycurgus was severely aristocratic, driving all handicrafts into the hands of slaves and foreigners, and confining the citizens to the use of the spear and shield, as men whose trade was war alone, and who knew nothing but how to obey their leaders and to conquer their enemies. In Sparta, a free man was not permitted to make money in business, in order that he might be truly free. Each thing connected with the business of making money, like that of preparing food for dinner, was left in the hands of slaves and helots. Numa made no regulations of this kind, but, while he put an end to the military plundering, raised no objection to other methods of making money, nor did he try to reduce inequalities of fortune, but allowed wealth to increase unchecked, and disregarded the influx of poor men into the city and the increase of poverty there, whereas he ought at the very outset, like Lycurgus, while men's fortunes were still tolerably equal, to have raised some barrier against the encroachments of wealth, and to have restrained the terrible evils which take their rise and origin in it. As for the division of the land among the citizens, in my opinion, Lycurgus cannot be blamed for doing it, nor yet can Numa for not doing it. The equality thus produced was the very foundation and cornerstone of the Lacedaemonian constitution, while Numa had no motive for disturbing the Roman lands, which had only been recently distributed among the citizens, or to alter the arrangements made by Romulus, which we may suppose were still in force throughout the country. With regard to a community of wives and children, which took a wise and statesman-like course to prevent jealousy, although the means employed by each were different. A Roman who possessed a sufficient family of his own might be prevailed upon by a friend who had no children to transfer his wife to him, being fully empowered to give her away by divorce for this purpose. But a Lacedaemonian was accustomed to lend his wife for intercourse with a friend while she remained living in his house, and without the marriage being thereby dissolved. Many, we are told, even invited those who, they thought, would beget fine and noble children, to converse with their wives. The distinction between the two customs seems to be this. The Spartans affected an unconcern and insensibility about a matter which excites most men to violent rage and jealousy. The Romans modestly veiled it by a legal contract which seems to admit how hard it is for a man to give up his wife to another. Moreover, Numa's regulations about young girls were of a much more feminine and orderly nature, while those of Lycurgus were so high-flown and unbecoming to women as to have been the subject of notice by the poets, who call them phanomerides, that is, with bare thighs, as Ibycus says, and they accuse them of lust, as Euripides says. They stay not, as befits a maid at home, but with young men in shameless dresses roam. For in truth, the sides of the maidens' tunics were not fastened together at the skirt, and so flew open, and exposed the thighs they walked, which is most clearly alluded to in the lines of Sophocles. She that wanders nigh with scanty skirt that shows the thigh, a Spartan maid fair and free, Hermione. On this account they are said to have become bolder than they should be, and to have first shown this spirit towards their husbands, ruling uncontrolled over their households, and afterwards in public matters, where they freely expressed their opinion upon the most important subjects. On the other hand, Numa preserved that respect and honor due from men to matrons, which they had met with under Romulus, who paid them these honors to atone for having carried them off by force, but he implanted in them habits of modesty, sobriety, and silence, forbidding them even to touch wine or to speak even when necessary except in their husband's presence. It is stated that once, because a woman pleaded her own cause in the forum, the Senate sent to ask the oracle what this strange event might portend for the state. A great proof of the obedience and modesty of the most part of them is the way in which the names of those who did any wrong is remembered. For, just as in Greece, historians record the names of those who first made war against their own kindred or murdered their parents, so the Romans tell us that the first man who put away his wife was Spurius Carvilius, nothing of the kind having happened in Rome for 230 years from its foundation, and that the wife of Pinarius, Thelea by name, was the first to quarrel with her husband and her mother-in-law, Gigania, in the reign of Tarquinius Superbus. So well and orderly were marriages arranged by this lawgiver. The rest of their laws for the training and marriage of maidens agree with one another, although Lycurgus put off the time of marriage till they were fully grown, in order that their intercourse, demanded as it was by nature, might produce love and friendship in the married pair, rather than the dislike often experienced by an immature child towards her husband, and also that their bodies might be better able to support the trials of childbearing, which he regarded as the sole object of marriage, whereas the Romans gave their daughters in marriage at the age of 12 years or even younger, thinking thus to hand over a girl to her husband pure and uncorrupt both in body and mind. It is clear that the former system is best for the mere production of children, and the latter for molding consorts for life. But by his superintendence of the young, his collecting them into companies, his training and drill, with the table and exercises common to all, Lycurgus showed that he was immensely superior to Numa, who, like any commonplace lawgiver, left the whole training of the young in the hands of their fathers, regulated only by their caprice or needs, so that whoever chose might bring up his son as a shipwright, a coppersmith, or a musician, as though the citizens ought not from the very outset to direct their attention to one subject, but were like people who have embarked in the same ship for various causes, who only in time of danger act together for the common advantage of all, and at other times pursue each his own private ends. Allowance must be made for ordinary lawgivers, who fail through want of power or of knowledge in establishing such a system. But no such excuse can be made for Numa, who was a wise man, and who was made king of a newly created state, which would not have opposed any of his designs. What could be of greater importance than to regulate the education of the young, and so to train them that they might all become alike in their lives and all bear the same impress of virtue? It was to this that Lycurgus owed the permanence of his laws, for he could not have trusted to the oaths which he made them take, if he had not by education and training so steeped the minds of the young in the spirit of his laws, and by his method of bringing them up implanted in them such a love for the state, that the most important of his enactments remained in force for more than 500 years. For the lives of all Spartans seems to have been colored by these laws. That which was the aim and end of Numa's policy, that Rome should be at peace and friendly with her neighbors, ceased immediately upon his death. At once the double-gated temple, which he kept closed as if he really kept war locked up in it, had both its gates thrown open and filled Italy with slaughter. His excellence and righteous policy did not last for a moment, for the people were not educated to support it, and therefore it could not be lasting. But, it may be asked, why did not Rome flourish by her wars? It is hard to answer such a question in an age which values wealth, luxury, and dominion more than a gentle, peaceful life that wrongs no one and suffices for itself. Yet this fact seems to tell for Lycurgus that the Romans gained such an enormous increase of power by departing from Numa's policy, while the Lacedaemonians, as soon as they fell away from the discipline of Lycurgus, having been the haughtiest, became the most contemptible of Greeks, and not only lost their supremacy, but had even to struggle for their bare existence. On the other hand, it was truly glorious for Numa that he was a stranger and sent for by the Romans to be their king, that he effected all his reforms without violence, and ruled a city composed of discordant elements without any armed force such as Lycurgus had to assist him, winning over all men and reducing them to order by his wisdom and justice.